the biggest mistake that last parliament did was to fail to apply consensus on key national important issues that were laid before them. And in that area, you realize that we retrogressed in a number of areas. One of them is the kind of laws we made that one emasculated IBC and resulted into what we now have, a crisis of elections. You remember when we went to the streets and we wanted to overhaul IBC, leadership and structure, and we passed very good laws. One that said that elections would never be manual. The process of basically reforming that organization. Mm-hmm. And Jubilee, using their tyranny of numbers, went back to Parliament and was able to overhaul that legislation. So that's one area of legislation that the last Parliament was able to injure the democracy of Kenya's democracy. The other one is in terms of the economy. You know that, because from my background, you know that in the last Parliament, that is the Parliament that presided over the degeneration of the economy. Mm. That is the first time we saw companies beginning to lay off workers. We saw companies listed at stock exchange starting to report losses. Mm. And basically, it's bulged on at the kind of laws that were made. And to be specific, the laws that were made in respect of banking sector, trying to manage interest rates, that really had an impact because money is the biggest instrument for economic development. So that was an area that I believe the last Parliament able to Okay. And then of course then we had those laws on security where Jubilee government pushed in laws that undermined freedom of assembly. Arbitrary arrest today is common. Okay. And those are products of last Parliament, which I think we should not repeat when you go in.
Okay. For you, Ditmas?
I think I want to correct my colleague that in Parliament, there is nothing like consensus. In Parliament, you take a vote. When you have a good idea, you have a bill, you bring on the floor of the House, you support it by facts, and then you lobby the other parliamentarians either to support it. And so that is not a mistake that happened there in Parliament. The majority voted and they had their way. The only mistake that Parliament did is that you remember we had the constitutional bills that had constitutional deadlines that have to be passed. So Parliament took time and they ran out of time. They rushed in the 11th hour to comply. And you know when you rush, you don't have to, you might sneak in some bills that are not well thought. That's why we had a lot of legal redress, the court suspending some clauses. So that's the only mistake that Parliament did, and I hope that going forward, even whenever we have a constitutional bill that has a constitutional deadline, I think the House Business Committee needs to give it priority so that we have ample time to debate and ensure that we are generating bills that are fully baked and will pass the test of time, not to be challenged by people going to court. So, yeah.
Otandi here talks about draconian laws that were pushed, of course, again, because of the tyranny of numbers. Do you think this was a big problem with the 11th Parliament?
I think the description of, or the definition of the word draconian, it depends. When you are in the media and maybe you have laws that maybe will check the media freedom, then the media practitioners will describe that bill as draconian. So it depends on what happened. Of course, Parliament approved those bills, but the court suspended them, not because they were draconian, but they were conflicting with some sections of the Constitution. So that's the reason that those bills were suspended. But again, I want to tell my friends, we seem to have a problem within our ODM, that once the party leader takes a position on a particular matter, The whole members of ODM are whipped, including even to the MCS. You remember now everybody...
Is it not the same thing that happens with Jubilee?
Not really. In Jubilee, we have democracy. We argue within ourselves. And I want to even to take my brother through some small basic education about how electoral process that IEBC used to manage elections looks like. He said that some members of parliament are computer generated. I want to tell him that the only process that was electronic was voter identification and the voter transmission. But tallying was manual. And the ODM, the presidential candidate for NASA, had the advantage of having more than 12 agents watching over on his behalf, because all the NASA affiliate parties had seconded their 2 agents per party.
All right, Didmas, I know Atandi has...
Let me say...
I will want us to take a short break, then I'm coming back with your response.
Just before the point goes off, I think let me advise my brother that we have not come here to discuss the electoral process. We have come here to discuss the next parliament, which we are going to be members. And let me say that I mentioned that I hope Jubilee has brought on board members who can debate and who can look at issues that affect Kenyans. I'm sad that I'm seated here with a man who apparently is going to be just going to be a voting machine in Parliament, because you are not going to be you have not been elected to wait for Jubilee's legislative agenda. We are Kenyans. We know that in this country today, Kenyans cannot afford basic facilities, basic needs. Kenyans cannot get jobs. So that is going to be our responsibility as members of Parliament, not going to say that we are going to sit there and wait for Jubilee to set agenda for us. We, as Parliament, we must find consensus on joblessness. We must find consensus on prices of basic commodities, and that is the work of Parliament. That's not the work of your party.
Let's take that break. We're getting back with this discussion on the 12th Parliament that will be in place in about a week's time. So let's just take a breather. We'll be back with this conversation.
This is KTN News.